Welcome to Turning Pages, a series of in-depth conversations with authors about their works.
The Old Moon in Her Arms, Lorri Neilsen Glenn's new book through Nimbus, reflects on the woman I have known, rather women I have known and been. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
I caught myself on that woman and women because there are multiple voices in this book.
Yes.
And you write about that in your introduction, that like essentially the you are now is an aggregate of the women you have been, and that you write them in different ways within the book, right? The she, the you, the way you address yourself is kind of key to this. And I'm curious about putting something like this together where you're talking about yourself over time, you're looking at memory, you're looking at reflections, and you're looking at the course of you. How do you distinguish which ones get which writing?
Thank you for that question. I think you might be one of the first people to notice that. Well, I was looking back on my life, a considerably long life, lucky to be so. And I thought, the person I knew, I had very vivid memories of a few things in my childhood, a few more in my teens. And I thought, that is another person, because in many ways it is. I mean, people can say biologically we're different people, certainly, but I think emotionally and psychologically we are as well. And when I look back at that, and I talk an awful lot about memory in the book as well. Is it, am I remembering? I'm remembering this young person. Now, can I get myself back there? Not really. Am I remembering my previous rememberings? Because that's how memory works. We store something, we haul it out again, we remember it, and then we put it back again a little bit changed. Am I remembering the stories that my mother told me that I have just incorporated? So it, puts into question all of these things. But I wanted to be able to address those different people. So in some cases, I'm talking about she, because when I look back, there's that distancing. In some cases, I'm talking you, because it seems like it's I don't know, perhaps a self I have always been, or an aspect of myself that has always been. And in writing, sometimes I and other writers tend to use you as an invitation into the reader as well. So I loved playing with that. And I can't honestly tell you what made me decide to stop using the she and turn it to her, or rather to me, that sort of thing. It was a gut thing. I just felt as though the ones that are referring to more contemporary times, it feels more like me, because it's more all of those old moons, if you will, all who, have gathered together now and are here now, representing who I am now.
Memory, you do talk about it a fair bit. I mean, it's a recurrent motif in the book, not just in the early phases when you're kind of like setting up that you're doing an act of remembrance, but also like later on, your recollections are kind of prismatic in some ways. Mm-hmm. You write about like McGill research on the fact that like we only have a certain capacity as far as memories go, and we discard some, and then certain ones get repeated and they become kind of firmly entrenched. Mm-hmm. When it came to writing this book, then, had you made notation or notes before this book that you drew on? You had kind of like outsourced your memory, and this wasn't necessarily all drawing on those core memories that you've repeated to yourself or had repeated to you?
In some cases, yes. Writers write, and you've probably heard this many times, you sort of feel so you can't not write. And so I had been writing, whether it was in my journals, which I keep only sporadically anyway, or pieces that I had written before but didn't publish. And in the case of the section about the death of both of my parents, I had been in Winnipeg during that whole time. And for some reason, perhaps anxiety, perhaps realizing I don't know, the huge thing that was happening, I just started keeping notes, not with any intention to write about it in the future. I just needed, that was my way of documenting or keeping track. And so I had those notes. They were just, like data. They were just raw. But I drew on them as well. So in some cases, the pieces in the book, and there's about 100 plus or so pieces, short pieces. In some cases, those are drawn from a sense memory, like an emotional memory. And in some cases I've drawn upon the actual factual information that I documented at the time. I mean, if I were to take a look at anything I'd written in a journal 20 years ago, it would sort of bloom right in front of me, because up to then it would be just inert. It would be nothing. And then I'd read it and, oh my gosh, I remember it. It all, it all comes back. But in most cases there, it was, I had it documented before, or I remembered it enough, and I mentioned this as well, kind of as an embodied sense. And so I was able to write it.
So the documentation, like, are we talking like specific dates and like notation of like what happened that day, or like how do you write notes, and then like does it serve as just like kind of like a seed that sprouts in your head once you see like a specific kind of word or description?
Yes, it does serve as that.
Yeah.
Even a few phrases, if I've been very careful to note what I'm observing or experiencing, then all it takes is just to read those again and it will come back. In some cases I do date, in other cases I don't, which is very frustrating, because that then results in a lot of research if you're planning to publish it, trying to track down the date, or, did he drive that car that decade, or was it the other car? And so then you have to do a lot of research. Okay?
How important is ascertaining those kind of details to you?
It's important to me in part because they are also memory triggers. So if I can change car to Dodge or whatever it happens to be, then I suddenly have access to more memories. So it is important to have the details.
You mentioned if I am careful to document these things. How careful are you generally? Is this like a practice you've come upon as a writer, or was this like intrinsically, if you think back to the younger you, was this something you already like intrinsically did?
I think I did. But when I went to university, I was really interested in just people, why they do what they do, always have been. And then later on, when I studied ethnography and became an ethnographer, then that was really important, to observe as dispassionately as possible, document, and be careful about the timing and, accuracy. That was really important. So it became a habit. Yeah.
Is this a work of ethnography on yourself?
In a way, yes, I would say so. But in doing so, and because I think no memoir is worth anything unless there's room in it for other people. I consider myself in some ways every woman. And I think that all of us, whether it's every man, every woman, I think we are all extraordinary. And often we don't recognize that. I mean that we all experience very similar things: huge losses, betrayals, joyful experiences, successes, minor or major, And those matter. I think everyone's life is, worth acknowledging. And if it's not documented, well, you know, sometimes we lose that important information. But I think that that's one of the things I wanted to do here, was to say, look, I have done this. I have been a mother, a teacher, a lover, a friend, a niece, a sister, all of that. And everyone I know has had many different roles. We're all different sides of ourselves. And it's important to recognize that and realize how important that is.
Yeah, you write about kind of pushing back against Arthur Miller and what his characters say in Death of a Salesman, right? About just like, we're one of any or many, that you argue for the extraordinariness of the ordinary life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. It's all extraordinary, and it's all in how we look at it. I think that we have to be able to get through the world by shortcutting certain things, driving to work, streets, cars. Okay, you know where it is. But if we slow down and say, this street, oh, look, this has changed. Oh, look, that bush has started to bloom. Oh, this, and the more specific we get to look at what we kind of tend to generalize or skip over, then the more appreciation we have for it. And I think that is true for people as well. So, and that's, not a long stretch, as you can well imagine, to how quickly we jump to othering people. So those people, my youngest son, who has a disability, was in a shop the other day in Halifax, and heard a man berate a woman in a hijab. He was so upset about that. And I tried to explain to him, well, for some people, they look at people who are different as other, and then they dismiss them, or they deride them, or, commit hate crimes, which is horrifying. But if we got to know everybody, if people would slow down and get to know a place, a person, a landscape, I think things would be different.
Is this book you slowing down and getting to know yourself?
I think so. I think we all need to do that. And we're fed so much, and sometimes it's confusing. Should I be this? Should I be that? And especially in your formative years, it's extremely confusing and disorienting. Oh, this is what I should be nowadays. Oh, this is what's in fashion, or this is how I should dress or talk, or this is the language I should use, and so on and so forth. And we all try that on at certain points. You try it on. In fact, I wrote about that. Trying on. How do I be a young woman? Is this how I laugh? Is this how I walk? I tell a story in there about when I was very young, and the girl next door walked in the most strange way. She was trying it out. She walked actually with her feet out like a duck, not because she was born that way, but because she thought that was the way she should walk. Therefore, I thought that's how I should walk too. And of course, my friend, told me, you look stupid. But I think everyone goes through that stage, all my friends are wearing these kinds of, T-shirts, therefore I should, or they're all wearing their caps this way, and therefore I should. And it takes a long while to say, no, this is going to be me. This is who I am. This is what I decide. And it doesn't matter what the fashion of the day is at some level.
Does that process extend to writing, to finding yourself as a writer and your voice? Like, you write about being a reader, and obviously you're absorbing other people's writing. You took formal education, you learned to write academically. Does the writing in a book like this come about through that, like, trial and error and like duck walking?
Yeah, I like that. I think in some ways it does. I think when I first started to write, I met, like so many, I tried to imitate the writers I admired. But of course, couldn't do that. I had to dig deep and just write like myself, like I sound. And I found, and here we are in a university setting, I found that as an academic and as a scholar, it was a bit of a challenge to resist some of the language that just seemed to change with every intellectual paradigm shift. And so then I had to, I had to learn that language. And it's almost like, I don't know, puppetry in a way. And I had to use it in order to, get an article published or, get acknowledged by your department, whatever it happened to be. And that's too bad. I know an awful lot of wonderful academics who are busting out and sounding like themselves, which I think is good.
So in that puppetry analogy, are you the puppeteer or the puppet?
The puppet.
Okay. And so the academic speak is the hand inside you.
The academic speak, or any other kind of speak.
Okay.
I have to, and people code shift anyway. They code switch. They have to do that. They know how to do that, and sometimes it's necessary, right? It's a survival technique. It's a skill, but if you do it knowingly, it's different from when you feel as though you're not the one in control.
Yeah. I'm very curious about process, and particularly for a book like this, where like sifting through things and putting something like this together. You write about it being a series of mixtapes and reinterpretations and recollections, and how you pull all that together and it becomes this book. Like theoretically, it feels like it's a process that you could just constantly be editing or recontextualizing or reconfiguring. And at what point you're like, this has to be the stop?
Yes, to all of the above. It does. What happened was I had some core material that I really wanted to publish. And then I realized I had all sorts of other things. And then what happened was everything from my great aunt, or rather my aunt, Aunt Kay, who died at 106 a couple of years ago. And she was the last of that generation in my family. And then I'm of the age where high school friends and university friends are dying or are in palliative care. In fact, I just heard of one this morning. And it's a wake-up call, and I know that a lot of people aren't all that crazy about Mary Oliver's work, but her statement, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life, is a bit of a wake-up call too. What are you doing and what have you done? And so I thought, I need to look back. I don't know how many years I have left, but I want to make sure that I have an understanding of where I've been, who helped me get there, and then what will be my priorities as in my last few years. So I gathered all this material together, and you hit it at that. I moved it around and I tried this structure and I tried that structure. And I realized what I was writing about were turning points or pivotal points, and also people who made a difference and what they taught me. And I think that that's something that's very, it's common to all of us. We know the friend who helped us out here and who taught us this, or the uncle who taught us that. We all know people like that, and I wanted to honor them. And then I thought, okay, I need to make hospital sheets on this thing here. I need to rein it in. So I don't know if you've heard of the French group Oulipo in writing poetry. Excuse me. And they choose a constraint. It could be they're going to write a poem that has no vowels or a poem that only uses the vowel I or rather the letter I, that sort of thing. And my constraint was I was going to write all of these pieces under 1,000 words each. And it was a wonderful exercise because it helped me to pair, to cull, to really sort out what mattered and what was important to tell. And then once I did that and I went through and I had all these little pieces, then I thought, okay, how do we move it? Is it just simply chronological? And I thought, no, it doesn't work that way because memory doesn't work that way. So it was both chronological and not, because it was chronological with flash forwards and flashbacks, all in these short pieces that I hope end up making sense by the end of the book.
The constraint of 1,000 words, had you written things that were longer and you're like, I need to like pare this down to 1,000, or did you think if I can't tell it in 1,000 words, I shouldn't be writing it?
The former.
Yeah. That there were some things that you could excise or at least like sharpen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
And then like, did you seek out an editor who understood what you were trying to get at? Like, because I have to imagine this might be like one of the more complex editing jobs for someone coming. Like, it makes sense to you because it's like
it's in my head.
It's in your head and it's a reflection of what's in your head. Whereas like trying to convey that to someone else who then has to help you convey that to the reader is maybe a different task than a different memoir structure.
Well, nowadays memoir structures are all over the map, which is a wonderful thing. It can be very innovative. But I had a fabulous editor. I approached Nimbus with this idea and I sent her about 30 or 40 pages. Whitney Moran, who's the editor there. And she loved the work. And so I told her what my idea was for it, how I wanted to approach. And she said, well, let's give it a try and see what happens. So she's been a great editor. You know, she caught me on a few things and let me know when this one maybe went too far or didn't go far enough, that sort of thing. The general things that a good editor will do. But no, she was very supportive right from the outset.
Right. You'd alluded earlier to your being in Winnipeg for your parents' passing. And you write, I would say, quite bracingly about it at times. How prepared were you in writing this to be revelatory about that period?
Well, I had written so much about it that I hadn't published. I think in part because it was a way of processing it and a way of trying to figure out, you know, what their lives meant and what they left behind, because it was a pretty fractious relationship they had. But I was prepared to write it. When I worked on it for the book, there were a few moments that were pretty tough. But when I work with students who are writing that kind of material, I often tell them, you know, if we keep that material in our head, bouncing around like a, you know, ping pong ball, or roiling our guts or making us feel upset or having anxiety attacks, which happens to people, you know, it's almost as though you have to get it out of your body and you put it on the page and then you have some distancing. It may still hurt. It may still be difficult, but the sooner you get it out there and away from you, then the sooner you're able to look at it. And here's where, you know, there can be some interesting discussion. When it's out there and you want to make something of it, you want to share it to the world, you want to turn it into something close to art, then another part of your mind takes over. How can I write this in the most effective way, the most the way that honors the experience the best way it can be honored.
Is it an emotional distancing and you become kind of more like clinical about
Yeah.
the art of it rather than the emotion that fueled it?
Yes. Yeah.
It sounds almost like meditative practice, right? Like the notion of like when a thought comes into your head, you're supposed to like acknowledge it and then like let it pass rather than dwelling on it.
That's a great analogy. Yeah. I like that.
So then writing yourself through this period with your parents, then like had you said you'd written other stuff and hadn't published it. Did you go back to that stuff
Yeah,
or
for
did you
sure.
write anew or both?
No, I had to go back to it because I needed to get the facts straight.
Mm.
You know, who was where and when and who said what and when. And a lot of the dialogue from that time is actually from my earlier notes. I mean, no one can be expected to remember a specific line of dialogue from, 10 years ago or 15 years ago. So it's a good thing that it was in my notes. Plus, also, anything that I had to fill in, which was minor in that case. When you know your family's speech patterns and you know what happened, it's fairly easy to reconstruct the dialogue and be fairly confident that it represented what happened.
Right. The veracity is about like a resonant truth rather than like a script.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Right. You write about being a parent yourself, and I'm curious whether your experiences analyzing yourself as a parent gave you insight or maybe empathy towards your parents and writing about them.
Oh, definitely. Oh, definitely. I think, though, I gained a bit of that empathy, or maybe a lot of that empathy for my mother far sooner than my father. And that was after I had children. And I looked back on her life as a 50s housewife who was a nurse, a very talented nurse, but frustrated because, with 4 children and prevented from having the kind of career she wanted, having to be accountable to everything, for everything to my father, all those things that some 50s mothers had to deal with, tamped down ambition or, following society's expectations. Post-war women had a lot of expectations held out for them. So I look back and I realized her frustration and some of the reasons why she was who she was. And I had an awful lot of compassion for that. And that's the wonderful thing about getting older. You do recognize those things later.
Then do you like start to see like kind of pattern recognition or like see kind of echoes in your own life that you didn't necessarily clue into previously? Like, is that part of this process?
Are you wondering whether or not I see
Like, do you
some
see
of my mother's behavior in myself?
I'm curious, like if you say like, oh, I didn't see this about myself until I saw it about my mom, let's say.
Yeah. I think I learned most about, dealing with maybe difficult children, recalcitrant kids, or, the limits of your, of your patience. I learned a lot about that. But I also knew fairly early on that I had all sorts of, I was from the generation that had a ton of opportunities. And I fully admit that. Our generation, the post-war kids were extraordinarily lucky. We could get any job we asked for, pretty much. We managed to get houses that didn't cost, $1 million. We're very, very lucky. So not only, was I lucky in that regard, but my parents, despite the difficulties they had, I think gave me a good, a good start.
Was there anything about yourself that you didn't reveal in this book? Like, was there anything you held back?
mean like the time that a dog ran out in front of the car and I had to take it to the vet? That sort of thing that
Right.
still sits in my guts.
Yeah.
Of course, we all have those sorts of things. But this wasn't meant to be sort of a, tell all of everything. It was more about who are the people, who are my kin, and how do they matter, and how do their lives matter? So, yeah, I suppose we all have those that we don't, we wouldn't write about necessarily.
Yeah, I'm just always curious in like there's obviously stuff that gets edited out, right? Like that, like you for lack of space or time. But
Yeah.
I do wonder about like how revelatory people feel comfortable being and whether there's anything like of themselves they want to like keep private, right? I've been watching Shogun, the adaptation, and they talk about, kind of there's the you for other people, there's the you inside yourself, and then there's like even a third you that's like veiled essentially, right? That like you build an inner wall. And I was curious if that's something that you directed around any of your writing.
That's really interesting. And I wonder if I would even know that.
I mean, I suppose that's the thing.
Am
right?
I fooling myself? It's
Yeah.
it's very possible I'm fooling myself.
Mm.
But memoir and writing about yourself, life writing of any kind, is by its very nature a matter of selecting. And I think if you're writing memoir, the danger is if you're writing it to get revenge, to get back at somebody, or just for the wrong reasons, it's not going to go well. But if you're writing it and you're willing to stay open and learn something about yourself, which I did, and learn what matters, which I did, then it's a much better memoir. We play too much with heroes and villains, and I don't think that the world is like that. No one is all hero, nor are they all villain.
Well, there are multiple women in The Old Moon in Her Arms. Lorri Neilsen Glenn, thanks very much for coming in and talking about the book.
Thank you for the fabulous questions.